6 Apache girls left to dying upside down until Mountain Man saw their tattoos. The sun was beginning to rise over the rugged canyon, casting long shadows across the rocky cliffs. Birds chirped in the distance, unaware of the danger that had quietly settled in the area the night before. In a small clearing near a dry riverbed, 6 young Apache girls had ventured out early, seeking herbs and berries that grew along the canyon walls. They were skilled in reading nature, knowing which plants could heal and which could harm. The girls laughed softly among themselves, their baskets swinging gently in their hands. The world felt safe and familiar, surrounded by the towering rocks and whispering winds of their homeland. But the safety of the canyon was an illusion. Hidden in the shadows, a group of dangerous men watched their every move. These men had been feared in nearby settlements for years. They were known to attack travelers, leaving few survivors behind. The girls had no idea they were being followed. Their laughter and chatter carried lightly through the crisp morning air, and they walked deeper into the canyon, unaware that every step brought them closer to a trap that had been carefully planned. Suddenly, a shout rang out. The girls spun around, their hearts pounding. Before they could react, strong hands grabbed them from behind, and ropes were thrown over their wrists. There was no time to fight back, no chance to call for help. The gang worked quickly, their faces grim and determined. They had done this many times before and had learned the quickest way to overpower even the strongest person. The girls struggled, but the ropes were tight and the men's grip was unyielding. Panic set in, but there was no escape. One by one, the girls were hoisted onto wooden frames that had been set up between 2 large rocks. Their arms were bound, and they were lifted upside down. The world spun around them, dizzying and frightening. The rough wood pressed against their backs and the ropes cut into their wrists. Their baskets of herbs and berries fell to the ground below, spilling their precious contents into the dirt. Each girl tried to speak, to ask why this was happening, but the men were already gone, disappearing into the canyon like shadows. The girls were left alone, dangling high above the rocky floor, their limbs aching, their bodies trembling with fear. The wind picked up, rustling through the canyon and brushing against the girls' faces. The first rays of sunlight hit their eyes, making it hard to focus, but also reminding them that the world was still moving outside their small, suspended prison. They clung to each other with their minds, if not their hands, sharing silent prayers and comforting thoughts. Tears ran down their faces, mixing with the dust and sweat from their struggle. Their hearts pounded as the reality of their situation sank in. They were trapped, alone, and helpless in a place where no one seemed to come. As hours passed, the girls realized that struggling too much could hurt them even more. They had to conserve energy, even though the ropes dug into their skin and their blood rushed to their heads. They shifted slightly, trying to ease the pressure and make themselves as comfortable as possible, though comfort seemed impossible. They whispered to each other softly, sharing stories of home, of their families, and of the lessons their elders had taught them. In this way, they kept their spirits alive, clinging to hope even when it seemed that the world had forgotten them. One girl remembered the small tattoos on her wrist, symbols her grandmother had given her for protection. She pointed to them silently, trying to reassure the others. Each of the 6 girls had similar markings, unique designs that told stories of courage, family, and resilience. Though they were upside down and surrounded by fear, these tattoos reminded them that they carried the strength of generations within them. They closed their eyes, imagining the hands of their elders guiding them, telling them to stay strong, to survive, and to wait for help that they hoped would come. Time moved slowly. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon walls golden, then white-hot under the midday heat. The girls' mouths were dry, their throats aching. They had nothing to drink and little to eat. The wind had cooled in the morning, but now it seemed to blow hotter, and the shadows that had provided some comfort were disappearing. They called out softly, voices hoarse, hoping someone might hear them. Every echo off the canyon walls was both a promise and a torment, reminding them that no one had yet come to rescue them. Despite the fear and pain, they found ways to help each other. One girl shifted her position slightly, passing a small piece of cloth to another who was struggling to keep her balance. They encouraged each other quietly, sharing memories of their village, songs their mothers had sung, and stories they had been told by elders. This connection kept them going. They knew that panic could be deadly, and they had to remain calm even when everything in their bodies screamed for escape. As the afternoon approached, shadows began to lengthen again, and the girls felt the first real pangs of hunger. Their baskets had been emptied long ago, and the harsh canyon offered little in the way of food or water. Yet they survived by sheer willpower, keeping their minds busy with memories and the small rituals they could still perform even while bound. They sang softly, in whispers, small songs of hope and remembrance. Each note seemed to fight back against the fear, reinforcing their determination not to give up, not to let the darkness of the canyon or the cruelty of the men steal their spirits. Even as the sun began to set, the girls held on. Their muscles ached, their heads throbbed, but the fire in their hearts did not waver. They reminded each other of their names, their families, and their purpose. They held on to the belief that someone, somewhere, might notice something unusual in the canyon. Broken branches, disturbed dust, footprints in the sand, and follow the signs to their rescue. Though they were young, they understood the importance of staying strong. Their survival depended not only on physical strength, but on their courage, their unity, and their refusal to give up. Night fell slowly and the temperature dropped. The canyon became a dark maze of shadows and sounds, strange and threatening. Owls hooted in the distance, and the occasional rustle of small animals reminded the girls that the world continued even as they suffered. They huddled their thoughts together, imagining warmth, imagining safety, imagining home. They remembered the stories of their ancestors who had faced impossible odds and had survived. Each memory became a shield against despair, each whispered prayer a promise to themselves that they would hold on, no matter what. Through the long night, the girls clung to each other with their minds and hearts, using every ounce of inner strength to endure the pain of being upside down, exposed, and helpless. They could feel the muscles in their arms and legs weakening, but their spirits remained alive. Their tattoos, small as they were, glimmered faintly in the moonlight, a silent testament to who they were and what they had survived already. They drew courage from these symbols, remembering that they were never truly alone. They carried the wisdom and protection of generations with them. As the first light of a new day began to break over the canyon, the girls still hung there, tired but unbroken. They had survived the longest hours of their lives so far, relying on their courage, faith, and each other. The canyon, which had seemed so cruel, was now filled with the quiet hope that rescue might come. They did not know when or who would come, but the thought of survival had taken root firmly in their hearts. No matter the fear, no matter the pain, they knew that as long as they held on to each other and their heritage, there was a chance they would see another sunrise. Together, the morning air was cold and sharp as it swept through the canyon, brushing against the 6 Apache girls who were still hanging upside down, exhausted but alive. The ropes dug into their wrists, and their muscles throbbed from the strain of being suspended for so long. Their breaths came in short, shallow gasps, and every small movement sent waves of pain through their bodies. Despite this, they were beginning to notice the small details around them, the way the sun hit the rocks, the smell of the dry earth, and the faint sounds of the canyon coming to life. Even in their dire situation, their minds sought patterns and signs that could help them survive. The girls tried to communicate quietly. Their voices were hoarse from shouting the day before, so they relied on whispers and gestures. Each movement had to be careful. One wrong twitch could loosen the ropes or throw them off balance. They shared what little water they had managed to conserve in their mouths, and they passed scraps of cloth to ease the friction on their wrists. It was a slow, painstaking process, but they had learned to work together, even in moments of great danger. Unity had kept them alive through the first night, and it would continue to be their strength. As they hung there, each girl began to remember the small tattoos on her wrists and arms, traditional Apache symbols that had been passed down through their families. Some were simple lines and dots, others more intricate designs representing animals, nature, or spiritual guidance. To anyone else, they might have seemed decorative, but to the girls, each tattoo held meaning. They represented courage, protection, and connection to their ancestors. Now, in the quiet tension of the morning, the girls found comfort in these markings. They traced the shapes with their fingers and whispered the stories their elders had taught them. Each symbol became a small shield against fear, a reminder that they were not alone even when left in such a dangerous situation. The wind shifted and carried sounds from deeper within the canyon. A branch snapped somewhere below, startling the girls. They froze, hearts pounding, listening carefully. Could it be the gang returning? Or perhaps some wild animal moving through the rocks? The canyon was full of secrets, and every sound could be a warning. They clung together silently, focusing on breathing slowly to calm their racing hearts. Each girl took turns scanning the ground below as best as they could from their upside-down vantage point, looking for any sign of hope, any clue that rescue might be near. Despite the fear and uncertainty, the girls found ways to keep their minds active. One of them began quietly singing a song her mother had taught her, a soft, lilting tune that spoke of rivers, mountains, and the strength of their people. Soon the others joined in, their voices hesitant at first, then stronger as the melody carried through the morning air. It was a small act, but it reminded them that life could exist, even in a moment filled with danger. It gave them courage, and for a short time, it pushed the terror to the edge of their minds. Hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. The canyon, once cool and shaded, now seemed to trap the girls in a tight, sunlit space. Their stomachs ached from hunger, and their mouths were dry, but they continued to speak quietly to each other, sharing memories of home and lessons from their elders. One girl remembered how her grandmother had told her that every challenge could be survived with patience and clever thinking. She shared this memory with the others, and they nodded, silently promising to endure whatever came next. The girls' tattoos became more than symbols, they became tools. They traced the lines and patterns with their fingers, using them to focus their thoughts, and to count hours or repetitions of quiet exercises to keep their muscles from stiffening completely. They imagined that each tattoo connected them to the earth, to the trees, and to the sky above, anchoring them even while their bodies swung precariously. The designs reminded them that they were part of something larger than themselves, a long line of people who had survived hardships before them. As the morning turned into afternoon, the girls began to notice subtle signs in the canyon. Broken branches, disturbed dust, and faint footprints hinted that someone might have passed through recently. Their hearts lifted slightly, though they did not dare to hope too much. The canyon was vast, and help could come from anywhere. Or it might not come at all. They whispered to each other, pointing out every tiny clue. and making plans for what they would do if someone appeared. The activity helped them focus, giving their minds a purpose beyond fear. The wind shifted again, this time cooler and carrying scents from the higher cliffs. One girl noticed at first the smell of smoke from the distant fire. It was faint, almost unnoticeable, but it made her heart leap. Perhaps it was a traveler, a hunter, or someone living in the mountains. She nudged the others, and they all leaned slightly, trying to see if there were more signs. Their upside-down position made it difficult, but they were clever, using what they had learned from living in the canyon to interpret the signs around them. Every small clue became a thread of hope, something to hang on to while they endured their frightening ordeal. Throughout the day, the girls kept telling each other stories. They spoke of the animals they had seen, the rivers they had crossed, and the songs their parents had sung. Each story reminded them of a world beyond the ropes and rocks. They imagined what it would be like to return home, to see their families and friends again. These thoughts were bittersweet, painful because they were not there, but comforting because they reminded the girls of everything worth surviving for. They clung to these mental images like lifelines, pulling themselves through the hours of fear. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, shadows returned to the canyon, stretching across rocks and crevices. The temperature dropped slightly, and the girls shivered. They huddled mentally together, imagining warmth in the sun and in each other's presence. They reminded themselves that night would bring darkness, yes, but also rest for the body and mind, and perhaps, by morning, a change in their fate. The idea of time passing slowly became less frightening when paired with hope, and each girl found a small comfort in the rhythm of the day. Despite their exhaustion, the girls remained alert. They had learned to notice even the smallest shifts in the environment, the way birds flew suddenly, the movement of shadows, the pattern of wind over the rocks. Every detail could be a clue to danger or rescue. They whispered observations to each other, making mental notes, and sharing ideas for what they could do if someone came. Even trapped and upside down, they refused to surrender their minds to fear. Their spirits, though tested, remained strong. As night began to fall, the girls could feel the canyon changing again. The air cooled further, and distant sounds grew louder in the stillness. Owls and coyotes began their evening calls, reminding the girls that life moved on even in the quiet of the mountains. They huddled in their thoughts, imagining themselves strong and free. They recited prayers and songs softly, their voices blending with the natural sounds around them. Each whispered word, each small song, became a tiny beacon of hope that kept their hearts beating steadily through the long night ahead. Though they were exhausted, hungry, and in pain, the girls drew strength from one another. They remembered the tattoos, their families, and their people, holding on to the belief that someone would notice their absence. They imagined a kind stranger or a brave rescuer, someone who could read the signs they had left behind and understand that help was needed. In the darkest moments, this vision of rescue, of safety, and of life beyond the canyon became the strongest motivation of all. By the time the first stars appeared in the sky, the girls had endured more than most could imagine. They had faced fear, discomfort, and uncertainty, yet they were still alive. They knew that survival was not guaranteed, but they also knew that giving up was not an option. Together they held on to hope, patience, and courage, understanding that these were the most important tools they had. Each tattoo, each whispered memory, each shared story became a thread holding them to life, weaving a fragile but powerful connection that might one day lead them out of the canyon and back to safety. The morning sun spilled over the cliffs of the canyon, painting the rocks with gold and orange streaks. Somewhere high above, a lone figure moved carefully through the rugged terrain. He was known among the nearby villages as a mountain man, a tracker, and a guide, skilled in reading the land and noticing details that others often missed. He had traveled these cliffs many times before, following game or scouting paths, but today his senses were alert in a different way. There was a faint feeling in the air, a tension he could not yet name, something that told him he was not alone in this canyon. The mountain man paused, listening. The wind carried scents from distant trees, the dry smell of rocks, and faint traces of smoke from campfires long gone. But there was something else, a subtle disturbance in the dirt below his feet. Broken twigs, crushed leaves, and scuffed sand told him that people had passed this way recently, and not just casually. He crouched, examining the marks carefully. They were uneven, hurried, and chaotic, signs of fear and struggle. He nodded to himself. Someone was in trouble here. As he moved forward, he noticed other clues. Small baskets had been knocked over, leaving spilled herbs and berries scattered across the path. This suggested that whoever had been here had been carrying something of value, something that could not be left behind. The mountain man's eyes narrowed. He knew immediately that the signs pointed to more than just lost travelers. They pointed to danger, perhaps even an attack. His pulse quickened, but he stayed calm. Panic could blind a person, but he had learned long ago that patience and careful observation were more powerful than rushing blindly into a situation. The canyon stretched before him, twisting and turning with jagged cliffs and hidden crevices. Every step required caution, for the terrain was unpredictable. Rocks could crumble underfoot, and hidden holes could lead to injury. But the mountain man moved like a shadow. Familiar with the rhythm of the land, he followed the broken branches and footprints deeper into the canyon, noting every detail. The sun rose higher, warming the stones, and giving him better light to track the movement of whoever had passed this way. He moved silently, listening to the canyon and letting it guide him. Then he saw it. At the edge of a small clearing, wooden frames were tied between two large rocks, and 6 young figures hung upside down. His heart sank. He recognized at once the danger the girls had faced. Their hands and wrists were bound tightly, and their faces showed exhaustion and fear. But as he looked closer, his trained eye noticed the small tattoos on their arms and wrists, traditional Apache symbols etched in careful lines and dots. Each tattoo told the story of heritage, protection, and resilience. The mountain man's mind raced. These were no ordinary travelers. These were Apache girls, and their tattoos marked them as part of a proud, enduring culture. He did not hesitate. He assessed the situation carefully. The ropes were thick but manageable, and the frames seemed stable, anchored between rocks that could hold weight. The girls were weak, but they were alive, still conscious, and able to respond. He needed a plan that would free them without causing harm. He looked around for any additional dangers, loose rocks, hidden traps, or even the possibility of the gang returning. Satisfied that the area was safe for the moment, he prepared to climb down carefully to reach them. The mountain man spoke softly as he descended, making sure the girls could hear him. "Don't be afraid.
I'm here to help. You are safe now."
His voice was calm, steady, and reassuring. The girl's eyes widened, unsure if this was another trick or a true rescuer. But the sound of his voice, carrying authority and care, gave them a glimmer of hope. They nodded weakly, clinging to the thought that rescue might actually be possible. He approached the first girl, examining the knots that held her wrists. They were tight, and her arms were red and sore. He worked carefully, loosening the ropes without causing sudden shifts that might throw her off balance. One by one, he freed them, supporting their small, trembling bodies as he lowered them gently to the ground. Each girl clung to him briefly, exhausted and still shaken, but safe. The mountain man's hands were strong but gentle, aware that they were fragile from the ordeal they had endured. As he freed the last girl, he paused to examine the tattoos more closely. Each symbol told him a little more about the girl it belonged to, the strength of her spirit, the protection of her family, and the courage that had allowed her to survive. The mountain man understood that these markings were not only cultural but practical. They were reminders for the girls themselves to stay strong and endure challenges. Even now, in a moment of crisis, these small symbols had guided him in recognizing their identity and the urgency of their rescue. Once all 6 girls were safely on solid ground, the mountain man helped them sit together and rest. He offered water from a small pouch he carried and encouraged them to take slow, steady breaths. The girls drank cautiously, their mouths dry and cracked from thirst. They looked around at the canyon, realizing that they were truly safe for the first time since the gang had left them. Relief began to wash over them, but they were still cautious. They had been through trauma and danger, and it would take time for their fear to fade completely. The mountain man reassured them gently. "You are safe now. No one will harm you here. I will make sure you get home." His words were simple but filled with conviction. The girls began to relax, leaning slightly on each other and on the man who had rescued them. They shared quiet whispers, telling each other that help had arrived at last. Some cried softly, releasing the tension and fear that had built up over hours of hanging helplessly. Others simply sat quietly, their minds still trying to process the horror of the previous day. He looked around carefully, scanning the canyon for any signs that the gang might return. Satisfied that the area was clear, he decided it was time to move. The canyon was vast, and traveling to safety would take careful planning. He instructed the girls to stay close and to move slowly, ensuring that no one slipped or fell. Each step was measured, and he guided them over rocks and past crevices, using his knowledge of the land to find the safest paths. They moved as a group, supported by his strength and expertise. Along the way, he continued to notice the tattoos on their arms. They were more than just cultural symbols. They had become a kind of map, a guide to understanding the girls' heritage and their resilience. He realized that these markings had not only helped him identify them, but had also helped the girls survive, giving them a sense of connection and inner strength even when they were in the most dire circumstances. He admired the quiet courage these symbols represented, and he spoke softly to the girls about staying strong and remembering their lessons. As the sun climbed higher, they made slow progress through the canyon. The girls' muscles ached, and they stumbled occasionally, but the mountain man's steady guidance kept them moving forward. He shared quiet words of encouragement, telling stories of others who had faced danger and survived. These stories reminded the girls that survival required patience, courage, and the willingness to trust someone who cared for them. Slowly, the fear that had gripped them began to ease, replaced by cautious hope. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau where the canyon widened and the trees provided shade. The mountain man allowed them to rest, giving them water and some of the dried food he carried with him. He encouraged them to speak to each other, to share their thoughts and feelings about what had happened. The girls hesitated at first, still processing the shock, but eventually they began to whisper their experiences, finding comfort in knowing that they were no longer alone. Their laughter returned in small bursts, fragile but real, a sign that hope was taking root once more. As the sun began to set, the mountain man looked at the horizon and plotted the next part of their journey. He knew that getting them to safety would take careful planning and vigilance, but he was determined. He would not leave them until they were completely secure. The canyon was dangerous, but with patience, courage, and trust, they could make it out together. The girls, though still shaken, began to feel a sense of security that had been missing for so long. They were alive, they were together, and they were finally free from the ropes that had bound them. The canyon was quiet as the mountain man led the 6 Apache girls along a narrow path between jagged cliffs. The sun had dipped low, turning the rocks a warm orange and casting long shadows across the ground. Every step was careful, measured, because one wrong move could send them tumbling down the steep slopes. The girls were exhausted from the previous ordeal, their muscles stiff and sore, but they clung to the mountain man's guidance and to each other. Their trust in him was growing with every careful step. The path was treacherous. Loose stones shifted underfoot, and the wind whistled through the narrow canyon, making it hard to hear anything else. The mountain man moved first, checking every step and pointing out safe places for the girls to put their feet. He encouraged them to move slowly and steadily, reminding them that rushing could be more dangerous than staying in one place. The girls followed closely, some holding on to rocks for support, others gripping each other's hands for balance. Each step forward was a small victory, and though they were tired, their determination was stronger than ever. The girls spoke quietly to each other, whispering stories and sharing memories to distract themselves from the pain and fear. They talked about their village, the animals they had seen in the mountains, and the songs their mothers had taught them. Even in such a dangerous situation, these small conversations reminded them of life beyond the canyon and gave them strength to keep moving. Their voices, soft but steady, carried hope through the rocks, a gentle reminder that they were alive and that help had reached them. At one point, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a steep drop. The girls froze, fear flashing across their faces. They had already faced so much, and the thought of slipping now made their hearts pound. The mountain man knelt down, speaking to them softly but firmly. "Take a deep breath. You are safe. Watch my steps and copy exactly what I do." One step at a time, he demonstrated carefully, placing his feet firmly, and then guided the girls across the ledge, step by step. Each girl followed, trembling but steady, encouraged by his calm voice and steady hands. As they continued, the mountain man noticed the tattoos on their arms again. In the harsh light of the setting sun, the designs stood out clearly, intricate and meaningful. He thought about how these small symbols had already played a part in their survival. They had guided him to recognize who the girls were, and they had given the girls courage when fear threatened to overwhelm them. He realized that these markings were not just art. They were tools of resilience, reminders of the strength within each girl and of the generations of people who had come before them. The canyon narrowed in places, forcing the group to squeeze through tight spaces. The girls had to bend low, sometimes crawling on hands and knees, while the mountain man helped them keep their balance. One girl stumbled, slipping slightly on a loose rock. The mountain man's hand was immediately there to steady her, and the other girls reached out to help as well. Together they moved forward, each girl drawing strength from the others. The ordeal had bonded them, creating a silent understanding that they were stronger together than alone. Even with their courage, fatigue was beginning to take its toll. Their stomachs were empty, and their throats were dry, but the mountain man reassured them that food and water were near. He had brought dried provisions with him, and he promised that once they reached a safer area, they would rest properly and regain their strength. This small promise gave the girls hope. It was more than just food. It was the idea of safety, of care, of life returning to normal after the terror they had endured. The shadows deepened, and the canyon grew cooler. The mountain man knew they needed a safe place to spend the night. He found a small plateau with enough flat ground for all of them to rest. He guided the girls there, helping them sit down and handing out small portions of water. They drank slowly, savoring each sip, and their eyes brightened a little as relief washed over them. He encouraged them to eat some of the dried food he had, but he warned them not to eat too quickly. Their bodies were weak and small. Careful steps were needed to regain strength. While the girls rested, the mountain man kept watch. He scanned the canyon, looking for any signs of danger. The night could bring wild animals, or even the possibility of the men who had left the girls bound returning. But the canyon was calm, and for the first time in many hours, there was a sense of peace. The girls, sensing his confidence, began to relax more. Some leaned against each other, closing their eyes for short rests. Others whispered quietly, telling each other how brave they had been, how they had survived, and how they would survive the rest of the journey. As the stars appeared in the sky, the mountain man told the girls stories to keep their minds occupied and spirits lifted. He spoke of his travels through the mountains, of people he had helped, and of lessons he had learned from nature. Each story reminded them that life could continue even after danger, that courage and intelligence could overcome fear, and that survival was always possible if one stayed calm and patient. The girls listened closely, drawing strength from his words and imagining themselves strong and capable, just like the people in his stories. By the time the moon rose high, the girls were able to stand more easily. Their muscles still ached, and their movements were slow, but the mountain man encouraged them, showing that even small progress was valuable. Together they continued along the canyon, moving cautiously but steadily. The path was still dangerous, but the girls were no longer paralyzed by fear. They had survived one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, and now they were taking the steps to safety. Each step became a symbol of courage, of resilience, and of hope. Along the way, the mountain man helped the girls over obstacles, sometimes carrying small items or holding their hands to keep them steady. They passed broken branches, shallow streams, and rocky slopes, each presenting a new challenge. But with every step, the girls gained confidence. They saw that the mountain man could guide them, that they could rely on each other, and that even the canyon's dangers could be overcome with patience and teamwork. The trauma of the previous day was still there, but it was slowly giving way to cautious optimism. Finally, just before dawn, they reached the edge of the canyon where the land opened into a wider, safer valley. Trees and soft grass replaced the harsh rocks, and a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of water from a distant stream. The mountain man allowed the girls to rest, kneeling beside them and letting them take in the scene. They had survived the night, the canyon, and their ordeal. Tears of relief ran down their faces, but this time they were mixed with smiles, small expressions of hope and gratitude. He reminded them that they were not yet home, but that the hardest part was over. They had made it out of the dangerous canyon, survived the traps, and endured hours of fear and pain. Their courage, patience, and the support of each other had carried them through. The tattoos on their arms, the stories of their ancestors, and the guidance of the mountain man had all played a part in their survival. They were stronger now, more aware of their own resilience, and more connected to each other than ever before. As the sun rose fully over the valley, the mountain man led the girls toward the village in the distance. He walked carefully but confidently, knowing that soon they would be reunited with family and friends. The girls followed, tired but determined. Their steps were slower now, but each one was filled with the knowledge that they had survived something incredible. The canyon had tested them in every way, but together they had made it through. By the time they approached the outskirts of their village, the girls could see people gathering, alerted to their return. Faces filled with worry turned to joy as the villagers recognized the girls. They ran forward to meet them, and the girls were finally able to release the last of their fear. They were embraced by family, comforted by friends, and praised for their courage. The mountain man smiled quietly, watching the reunion, knowing that the girls were finally safe. Their journey through fear and danger had ended, and a new chapter of life filled with hope and care was beginning. The village was quiet in the early morning, with the first rays of sunlight spilling over the rooftops. Birds sang in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the earth and the river nearby. In the distance, 6 young Apache girls walked slowly toward their homes, guided by the mountain man who had rescued them from the canyon. Their faces were still pale from exhaustion, and their arms and legs ached from the ordeal. But there was a new light in their eyes, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the beginnings of hope. As they entered the village, the sight of their families waiting filled their hearts with emotion. Mothers rushed forward, tears streaming down their faces, arms outstretched to embrace the girls. Fathers and older siblings joined in, holding the girls tightly, whispering words of comfort and love. The girls clung to their families, overwhelmed by the warmth and safety they had longed for while trapped in the canyon. The mountain man stayed back for a moment, letting the reunion unfold, knowing that this was the reward for all his efforts. His eyes softened as he watched the villagers cradle their children, knowing that they were finally safe. The villagers listened intently as the girls told their story, speaking in quiet voices at first, and then gaining confidence as they realized the danger was truly over. They described the gang that had left them bound upside down, the fear that had gripped them, and the strength they had found within themselves to endure. They spoke of the tattoos on their arms, symbols given to them by their ancestors, which had reminded them to stay strong and survive. The mountain man gently corrected details here and there, explaining how he had followed the signs in the canyon and freed them one by one. Every word strengthened the villagers' respect and admiration for the girls' courage and the mountain man's bravery. The village elders gathered to speak with the girls, praising their resilience and bravery. They reminded the girls that the hardships they had faced would become stories of strength for the community, stories that would inspire others for generations. The girls listened, eyes wide, realizing that what had seemed like pure misfortune was now part of a larger story, one of survival, courage, and the power of family and community. Even though the scars of the ordeal would remain for a while, they understood that they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to their heritage. The mountain man was invited to stay with the village for a time, and he accepted. Though he insisted he did not need praise or reward, he had acted out of a sense of duty and compassion, knowing that someone needed to help the girls. The villagers welcomed him warmly, offering food, water, and shelter. He shared stories of the mountains, of trekking and surviving in the wilderness, and the villagers listened closely, learning from his knowledge and experience. The girls, meanwhile, rested and regained their strength, grateful for the calm and safety that surrounded them. Over the next several days, the girls slowly recovered. Their bodies healed, and their spirits grew stronger. They spent time with their families, helping with daily chores, tending small gardens, and sharing what they had learned during their ordeal. The experience had changed them in many ways. They were more aware of their own resilience and courage, and they had learned the importance of patience, teamwork, and trust in others. The tattoos on their arms, once simply symbols of heritage, now also served as reminders of survival and hope. The mountain man taught the girls more about the land, showing them how to read tracks, notice subtle changes in the environment, and find safe paths through the wilderness. They learned not only how to survive in nature, but also how to respect it and use knowledge wisely. The girls absorbed everything eagerly, their curiosity renewed and their confidence growing. What had been a terrifying experience had transformed into a lesson in courage, intelligence, and the power of human connection. They realized how quickly danger could strike, even in a place that felt safe. They strengthened their community, teaching younger children to recognize hazards and be alert. The story of the 6 girls became a lesson for all, showing that courage and unity could overcome even the darkest circumstances. They honored the mountain man not just for rescuing the girls, but for demonstrating that compassion, knowledge, and calm determination could save lives. Months passed, and the girls continued to grow in strength and confidence. Their experience remained vivid in their memories, but it no longer held them captive with fear. Instead, it became a source of inspiration. They shared their story with others in the village and neighboring communities, emphasizing the lessons they had learned: to stay calm in danger, to trust in their own abilities, and to support one another. Each retelling strengthened the bonds of their community and kept alive the memory of the mountain man's heroism. The mountain man eventually prepared to leave the village, as his life in the wilderness required constant movement. The girls and their families insisted on seeing him safely on his way, giving thanks and small gifts as tokens of their gratitude. The mountain man, humble as always, accepted quietly, knowing that the greatest reward was the safety and happiness of the girls he had rescued. They waved goodbye, but the bond they had formed would remain forever, a quiet reminder of courage, trust, and human kindness. Even years later, the story of the 6 Apache girls and the mountain man was told and retold. Children in the village learned about the tattoos that had guided their survival, about the courage it took to endure fear, and about the importance of helping one another. The girls themselves became symbols of strength, showing that even in the darkest moments, hope and bravery could light the way. The mountain man's actions were remembered not as a single heroic deed, but as an example of the difference one person could make when guided by knowledge, compassion, and courage. The girls grew up carrying the lessons of the canyon with them. They remembered the fear, the pain, and the exhaustion, but they also remembered the trust, the hope, and the rescue that saved them. Each tattoo on their arms continued to remind them of their heritage, their courage, and the day their lives were saved. They shared these lessons with the next generation, teaching children about strength, unity, and the importance of staying connected to family, culture, and community. In the quiet of the village, the canyon remained as it had always been, a place of beauty and danger, mystery and challenge. But for the girls, it was no longer a place of fear. It was a place where they had faced unimaginable danger and survived, where their courage had been tested and proven, and where the kindness of one person had made all the difference. Their story became a symbol of hope, reminding everyone that even in moments of despair, help can come, courage can rise, and life can continue with strength and resilience. And so, the 6 Apache girls, once left to die in the harsh canyon, grew into women who carried the memory of that day in their hearts. They honored the mountain man not only by remembering him, but by living lives full of courage, wisdom, and care for others. Their journey through fear and survival became a legacy, inspiring everyone who heard their story. Through their resilience, the canyon no longer represented danger alone, but also the power of hope, the importance of unity, and the quiet heroism that exists in the world.